So leadership 4.0, agility and empathy in harmony with AI-based management. I think we have all the buzzwords on board. So yeah, let's go. I'm Christina. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Ali Labs from Munich. And in my former role, I had the pleasure to also lead a scale-up, a Berlin-based fintech called Nuri through, let's say, the good and nice and scaling phases. But also I had the challenge, or let's call it the adventure, to actually maneuver the ship through the worst or the toughest times that a startup can actually go through. And today I want to use this talk to share a bit of like learnings and insights, because obviously, as we heard this morning also from Rainer, we're still living in very uncertain times, and whatever we learned in terms of like leadership, scaling and management in school or in university, it just doesn't hold true anymore, right? Because like every day, like we're faced with a new crazy challenge, and no one has ever done it before. So we actually have to stay a bit more flexible, and how to approach this leadership, or what we did back then. I would like to share like the real life experience, because that's sometimes a bit more helpful than out of a school book. But then also I want to talk a bit about how we can now use new technologies to basically run our company more effectively in terms of management, that actually leaves us even more time for the leadership, which is more needed than ever today. So as I said before, I think the times are still very uncertain, right? And like uncertainty and like new challenges that have never been there before, like has become the new normal. So we're still going through an economic crisis, and we as a startup, we faced it, 2 years ago, when we actually went out for a Series C fundraising, it was like impossible to raise a growth round back then, because the war started, the financial market broke down, and like, I think we still have not recovered from the after effects of Corona, the inflation, still like on the financial side, I think the markets are still very volatile. And that puts us as leaders like in front of like huge challenges. And we're still facing them every day when we have to take decisions. At the same time, technology is like changing the way how we work, the way how we actually consume products, but also the way how we have to run a company massively. Because if we don't leverage technologies in like a very fast manner, we might lose out on efficiency, and that also means that we might lose out on our competitive edge. So again, like one of my favorite sentences is, technology should always be an enabler and not a driver. And I think especially with the AI hype, we see a lot of like, oh, technology first, and then look for the problem later. But still, I mean, there's a lot of technological disruption going on. Just think about the way how we work. Right, in 2020, I think it changed our life forever through the pandemic. Now, a lot of people are just sitting at home. We have to adapt to like remote setups, staring at the screen the whole time, maybe lacking out a little bit of the human connection. And that brings me to the third challenge, which is still the social challenges we are going through. I think the world is changing so massively, and that's freaking exhausting for us as human beings, right? Because the biggest asset we have in a company are, in the end, our people, and these are human beings. We're not machines, even though we somehow try to create efficiency as we would deal with machines. But this is not the fact. And like, people are very exhausted these days, and that also means we have to approach the way how we lead a company, because we're under a lot of pressure. And don't I know it, like being a CEO, actually tried to raise a Series C in a time which was impossible. At the same time, your people are exhausted, and you become like a little bit the punching ball, but still have to stay positive and bring the energy in, because if you lose that, you're absolutely fucked. So, and then at the same time, I mean, as we would have not enough challenges at the moment, like we're still facing a lot of environmental challenges. I moved to Munich recently, and like every morning I go for a walk at our river Isar. And right now the Isar like has been like over flooded, and like you cannot even walk anymore because there's so much water coming down. And I think we actually face like the climate change now on a weekly basis. I mean, last week we took out our down jackets in Munich. This week again, like we could actually put on the bikini. So it's like crazy. And I think that also we have to take this into the equation as leaders of companies to actually think about how we need to run our business sustainably, so we can also adapt to the changes we're currently facing. So what does that mean, right? If we're facing all these challenges, we actually need two things as a leader these days. And that's flexibility and agility, because the situations, like we cannot plan, like the planning cycles have become shorter and shorter. And during my times as a CEO, I had a lot of old man mentors, like corporate CEOs, and let's say the typical old white man. And whenever I came up with a new challenge, they look at me and they said, look, I've never managed a company through a pandemic. Maybe I managed them through a financial crisis, but all the effects that are now coming together is even new to us. And we're like in this for the past 30 years. And that was actually for me always quite, I don't know, like if it gave me hope or if it scared me even more. But I think I felt always, hey, we're in this together and we're just facing challenges as no one has ever been into. And I think when we talk about agility, when I started my career in mobile and tech back in the days, agile was something that you had in like a product and tech team, but then the rest of the company followed completely different rules. And I think I want to bring up these buzzwords because I still feel like we somehow position them somewhere in the tech world, like within the product teams at the lowest level. But we need to really embrace that as leaders on the very top of a company, because just because we make a plan for the next 5 years, we don't even know like what's happening the next 5 months. So it needs, like us on the top management level, we need to stay flexible and agile. And that's something we tend to forget, that an organization cannot be led in a like super stable manner anymore. We have to think differently. And secondly, what I faced, what I'm still facing like on a daily basis, working in a startup and scale up it's exhausting anyways, right? But on top, we're facing like all the challenges, like people suffering from loneliness by just sitting at home in a remote setup all the time. At the same time, it's really hard to get them in the office, even though you see like they're really enjoying it. And then we also see that the life situations of people have become harder and harder, right? You have a lot of single parents and so on. And I think that's why also we have to really look into who are the people we're dealing with, who are the people that actually supporting us in our success, and pay back to them by actually understanding, like have a bit of empathy for their situations. So I would like to share a bit what we did in my company to actually achieve that flexibility that I was talking about. So one of the probably most tangible situations I can give you is when we wanted to raise our Series C. We built up the relationship with all the growth funds across the globe. And then we wanted to go out for the race before Christmas. We were 2-3 weeks too late. Then we decided, you know what? Let's not go out before Christmas. But in the new year, we woke up and the world has changed forever, right? The financial markets crashed, the war started, and it actually put us in a situation that even our runway shortened from like 10, 12 months to like 3. And you suddenly are facing a situation that completely changes how you thought about your business. Then basically the day we went out, the war started, like literally. That meant that all the growth VCs at some point just told us, can we shift our call? Because we don't even know what that means for us as a fund. So in the end, like it dragged on. We received a lot of bridge funding from our existing investors. But then at some point they came back. And the same individuals that asked me a few weeks before, can you actually make your case more aggressive? To a point where we already said, is that surrealistic? Actually came back and said, can you become profitable this year? And if you, I guess you all work in the tech and startup world, but there's no more significant difference between planning for, like putting out a business plan for high growth versus to become profitable. And in the end, what I learned after 6 people giving me individually the same feedback within a week, I understood I don't have a lot of time to actually change the strategy, locking myself in a room for a month to think it through. No, we have to do it tomorrow. So I actually went home, I actually sat on my laptop and I wrote a Word document, 2-pager, where I explained the situation. I called in my C-level the next day and I said, we're gonna lock ourselves in this room and we're not gonna leave it before we solved it and have somehow plan how we actually achieve this. And we did that. We made a plan within 24 hours. And actually then we started to actually think about, okay, what do we need to do? Because it requires completely changing the product roadmap from products that would monetize in a few years towards pure monetization of existing products. That means the product roadmap changed 100%. At the same time, you have to cut costs, run cost-cutting programs. But the worst thing actually that we had as a last step was also letting go quite a lot of people. In our case, that meant letting go 120 people. A lot of them basically just left another continent, like for us, still being in probation, moved their entire family, their entire lives over from India or Pakistan. And you know, I have to look in your face and say, you know what, thanks for your trust, but I think we cannot continue our path together. Like all this stuff happening. But what I learned in this moment is I was doing that for the very first time. And yes, you get advice, but in the end, you cannot do it alone, right? And it doesn't really help for me locking myself in a room to come up with a plan which still a lot of founders tend to do often, or think they have to do it. What helped me a lot is like just involving my C-level, involving even the middle management, because they know their people way better, in actually the change process, and help them to actually drive this change. Instead of like coming up with a top-down plan, you can give them a frame, but you need to leverage them to actually activate it. I think because otherwise you're not managing that in a really great empathetic manner. It's always like when you come up with these things that you have to do, it's very important that you give them the whole context and explain them why. I explained them, look, this is how my life really looks like. I mean, you try to beautify a lot of things as a CEO, but this was a moment where I sat down and said, look, this is how my past 2 or 3 months have been. This is exactly what happened in which meeting. This is what happened outside in the world, and this is how it affects us. So providing this overarching context, not only to my C-level, but to the middle managers as well, and really taking a lot of time for that. In the end, everyone can embody like what you're going through, and everyone intuitively often knows what to do in their areas. What helped me a lot is I hired over my CTO from Silicon Valley. She used to be a director at PayPal, and she basically was a very, very great tech leader. But she originally came from India, moved to the Valley, and also recently only moved over to Berlin for us. And actually, for example, her perspective on like someone that moved recently helped me a lot to shape the message or even rethink the actions, how we can help these people in their individual cases. And that's also very important, that you don't think, hey, we're sitting here in Berlin, you know, we're covered somehow by social insurance, but there's a lot of people in your company which are not. Another guy in our C-level, he was handicapped, he had a really bad accident a few years ago. So his perspective on the situation also was a very different one that, for example, I had. And for me, that was really, really key. I usually refuse to sit on diversity panels because I found them not very constructive. But I think in this case, I really, really understood how helpful it is to get diverse perspectives by really solving very complex challenges. And last but not least, I think whenever we go out fundraising and work with our VCs and so on, everyone wants to have the security of a 5-year plan. The fact is, there is no 5-year plan anymore because we have to incrementally adopt and do rather smaller changes. So what we did, for example, when we planned our mass layoffs, is also that we tried to map out what are the different employee personas that we have, right? We have the people like me living in Berlin forever, but then we have the people that recently moved, and we try to really map out like from product management to like which buckets basically do we have and who is in what situation, so we're capable of really reacting to that and also support them in their individual situations. So that was also very helpful for me, and I think also now I'm applying this a lot when I have challenges or like we're going through change, which I think every company does these days, to really get more empathy for the single employee groups that you have in your company. I think last but not least, when it comes like how to lead in a more human way, sometimes it's really paying attention to this single situation. And I can remember when we had to communicate the mass layoffs, and I somehow just called out the different situations we have in the company, that people came to me later on and they said, you know, it must be a really fucking hard day for you. And I understand I have to go, but I want to thank you that you actually gave me the feeling you see our situations. And this is like a cheap thing. It doesn't cost you anything, but it actually pays the respect to the people that actually put a lot of trust in you. I think the second thing is like values. And also, again, like this whole topic of values, sometimes it seems to me it's a sticker on a laptop. But I think in this kind of situation, it really, you cannot do it 100% right, especially if you do it for the very first time. But what I told myself in one of my lowest moments was, as long as I can look in the mirror in the morning or in the evening when I brush my teeth, I want to know, like, did I do the best I could today? Did I like talk to enough people? Like, did I do the best I could today? And did I act according to my value system? And this will not please everyone, right? And it's fine, but I think this is still the most important thing, that people can see. Like, talking about values and all that stuff is nice when you're in a scaling phase, you just raise funds, everything's nice. But I think the values of people and companies really stand out when you're going through the worst times as a company. And then also, you know, as I said, there's single parents, there are people that have to take care of their parents in another country and so on. There's a lot of individual situations. If people are loyal to you and they do a great job, like, you should really have also some flexibility around their situations, because then this is how you stay successful in a very challenging world moving on. All right, so I think all the stuff that I probably told you was not necessarily super new. but I wanted to actually show you a bit like how it was very helpful for us going through these challenging times. But then again, whenever I talk to people about it, and also before I joined my new gig at Ailey, I was consulting a lot of management teams going through crises. And the sentence I always heard was, yeah, okay, Christina, but I mean, let's face it. I mean, sorry, I have a company to run here. As almost it would be like either I do like the soft stuff, the lies leadership stuff is like pampering everyone, or I can manage my company. I just bullshit, right? Because in the end, we're living in a different time, and it just forces us as leaders. I think our job is getting way harder to actually combine both. And I think, again, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, technologically, we're quite in a different stage than we are today, right? We saw the rise of ChatGPT, Gen AI in the past years. There's a lot of great tools and support that you can get from technology to basically do your job more efficiently, that then leaves you with more time for actually leadership. And this is, I think, we should all embrace, right? We should not see technology always as a threat. I mean, I guess we're here at the tech hive, so I hope you don't see it as a threat. Sometimes it can be still exhausting to always like, change the way how you think about solving a problem. But again, right, and especially with AI, I want to repeat, technology is an enabler and not a driver. So I think in the end, it's about how can we leverage technology to be more efficient, to have really more time for the softer challenges we have as leaders. And therefore, I would like to actually dive deeper into a few use cases where you can actually use AI already, to basically make your job more efficient, to lead better, and to be able to actually react better on the changes that you're facing within your company. Some people actually, I mean, rather the older generation, maybe also my family, ask me, but if you actually use AI, like that means also that you don't need so many people anymore. But it is not unethical. I think it's very unethical if you let people do jobs that technology can do better and more efficiently, and rather actually use it somewhere else. This is my personal position. I think there's probably different use cases where we have to have a deeper conversation on. But I think to sum it up, I think we should rather see how we can use technology to basically enable higher efficient decision making. All right. I mean, one of the questions I usually had every morning, I opened my computer, so very scared. I was always like, hey, is there any risk in like achieving my plan? Or is there any opportunity out there that I might have not seen? And in my former role back then, I mean, is there any opportunity I haven't seen meant like being 24/7 on call with my existing investors, with my network, with other leaders and founders that were going through the same. But I think now, basically, we have tools that allow us to do a very efficient morning check-in on risks and opportunities of your company. So I think also like getting access to real-time data and like especially real-time analysis is something that I think has improved massively to the time like 2-3 years ago. So you can basically get analysis of your data and like the latest status with a really big amount of data, way better than we were a few years ago. Accurate predictions. I mean, back in the days as well, like we use a lot of like spreadsheets in order to make our predictions. And if you're very honest, I mean, it was a bit finger up in the air kind of predictions. And I think also when it comes to AI, it's all not rocket science, I'm telling you here, by the way, on the slide. I think we've really, really come a long way in the past 2-3 years to have like way better models, more access to data, that we can actually predict the way our business is moving forward. I usually needed to rely on like other people telling me how the market is evolving, but I think now actually also having the effects of COVID, of the financial crisis like at hand, I think helps us a bit more to react also to these kind of future developments. And last, the third one is as well, I mean, Gen AI has been really on the rise last year. And I think what we're not leveraging it well enough so far is to really get personalized insights based on internal and external data. So if you imagine, I mean, in the end, back in the days in large enterprises or corporations, you had the management consultant coming in. You usually spend like, I don't know, how many 6 digits amounts, or if not even millions, on basically having people analyze your data and actually find an information that you could not maybe get from just reading a chart. But now actually Gen AI can do that for you and like provide you with insights and aha things in your data that you might not be able in an efficient manner able to even detect. So I think also having like morning check-ins on risks and opportunities is a great way to actually manage your company more efficiently, because it requires you less talking, probably less perspectives, but you can actually rather boil it down to the hard facts. So, and then the thing is always, I always need to rely on like people providing me with data in order to be informed if there are changes happening. And if there are changes happening, what does it mean for my actual plan? So I can react fast. So I think now, when I said like last year was more or less the year of Gen AI, I mean, this year is all about agentive AI, right? And the great thing about an agent is that it's not just like the input-output kind of thinking. So, hey, I know what kind of information I'm looking for, and someone gives me an answer. But an agent can be basically rather be defined based on a goal, right? Kind of the portfolio value I want to optimize, for example, if I'm a pharma enterprise. And this is now a great way also that agents, compared to all the solutions we had before, were way more proactive, because they constantly, you give them a goal, and what they're doing for you is constantly looking for optimization potential. And if something like has been triggered, either internally because some data dropped, maybe you have some absenteeism in a manufacturing site, or you even have a competitor coming on the market that can basically finalize their studies quicker than you. So we're doing a lot also for pharma customers. Then basically you need to know that, because you need to react. Because in pharma, it's like if your competitor is ahead of you, also this decreases your value significantly, and you might even want to stop your project. So kind of external and internal data can be analyzed by an agent all the time. And the agent is, I mean, as the name says, right? It's like a person constantly checking for you if there's something you need to react on. And I think the biggest the biggest opportunity here is really that it's rather proactive, and you don't have to actually constantly look for it yourself. You can then basically adjust your optimized scenarios based on what the agent is suggesting you, and then you can change your strategy. And just if I now tie back to what we had during my former role, during the fundraising, right? The whole world has changed significantly. It was not just that the crypto market crashed, the financial markets crashed. On top, we had like the war starting. I think there were a lot of effects where it would have been great if we would have a proactive agent that helps us actually to rethink the scenario that we're in. But then again, once you have your optimized scenario, I mean, then the question is, how do I react on that in the best manner? And I think especially on this case, when it comes to recommendable actions, so to say, actionable recommendations, I think also here agents can really help to constantly optimize your implementation road and your actual actions, keep track on them, and really make sure that even the way how to get to your new scenario is constantly being updated and adjusted to internal and external data. So things are changing very quickly these days, and I need to update my plans more frequently and change my scenarios more often. We had a very, very, very complex business case in my former company, because we were a fintech and we were like very close to getting our banking license. And that also means we had a super, super complex spreadsheet. And whenever I said, can we get a new scenario, that was the finance team like sitting there for 10 days, if even, and to actually provide me one scenario. So it was really, really crazy how long it often took a few people to update the plans. And I think this is something we really underestimate, this kind of operational overhead we have in a company to just get a new scenario. And as I said before, like even though we somehow learned how to live and survive in a world where a war is still, by the way, going on, and the financial situations are very unseen, you need to do that stuff more often and integrate both, again, internal and external data to basically update your plans. And right now it's done very inefficiently. So also dynamic resource allocation. So for example, do I have to take away some resources maybe from my growth team and put it more towards the tech team? Or how do I actually set even up the resources in my company, right? Which are the parts I really want to invest in? It's something that we not tend to do very often, because then you hired your teams and you scaled in a certain manner. But that doesn't mean that 6 months later, the whole setup and share of departments and people in your department still makes sense yet. And dynamic resource allocation is something I personally only know mostly from the corporate world, but we tend to forget also in the tech and scale-up world. Now tying back, I think Rainer said it as well, we live in like really crazy times. Like we need to use our resources very efficiently in a company. And I think this is a work that we tend not to do, because it requires a lot of capacity or even people doing that stuff. But again, we can now leverage AI to really see and maybe do a quarterly check-in, like the way how I actually set up the capacity in my team across tech, across growth, across data, marketing, does this even make sense for me? Because in our case, when we shifted from high growth to profitability, do I still need a 20 people growth and marketing team? Probably not. So yeah, scenario planning, resource allocation, two things where you can actually save a lot of time and headcount in order to actually be more efficient, and especially also do that more in real time. And I think last but not least, I think it's also more coming from the enterprise and corporate world. I mean, we're focusing a lot on Fortune 500 companies, but I mean, also really understanding what is driving your business these days, and this can change. And I think especially as the consumer behavior artificially, for example, through COVID changed, and we actually thought, oh, now everything is like just e-commerce and online, and it massively dropped again. So we see like all the valuations going down, especially for e-commerce companies. What is driving your business can really change these days massively. But a lot of us, when we're managing a company, we're not taking into consideration to really look into the drivers. We don't even have this information, or you need people preparing slides for weeks. You can get this also now with one click by leveraging your data in the respective manner. All right, so what is relevant for my work today? So at some point when stuff gets really overwhelming, I usually had a physical notebook. And when I had my first morning coffee, I usually wrote down what are my top 5 today to not go mental. Because that was a really, really crazy time. And in the end, you always have to focus yourself, which decisions do I need to make today? And the rest is for you noise today. So you live rather in a day-to-day basis. But this is sometimes also really hard, right? You get a good intuition for it at some point. But then you really need to figure out, okay, based on the world, how my company looks like today, what should I focus on? And I think also here, we can really leverage AI way better by basically having a look into your data and prepare you with daily briefings with the most relevant internal and external insights, having competitive reports and news via GenAI, detect the relevant insights internally and externally. And it helps you then again to focus way more on the strategic decisions than digging deeper into the data and basically doing manual analysis. All right, and then, I mean, managing is very complex, right? And still, when we talk about a 30, 50 people startup, we were 250. I think still the complexity was a bit overseeable. But now it gets very interesting, especially now when we think of more enterprise or corporate solutions, right? Because there you often have 10, 50,000 people. And then managing becomes very, very complex. And you also have to understand the cross-department effects. And this is something that often we, as managers, in the past years, didn't even have a look into. It was maybe possible if you have like the McKinseys and the BCGs coming in, analyzing your entire business and then maybe talking to each other to detect some effects. But actually, in the end, it's very hard to detect the correlations. How does like my people numbers affect my financial outcomes later? There is a correlation, right? And or even between manufacturing and finance. But it's very, very hard to get a full overview. And you have to often check, like every department has the different tools. And then in the end, it's very hard to get it together. And what ultimately happens, again, human beings sitting at a table together and trying to figure it out. But it's, again, finger up in the air. And that's the great thing, again, about AI and about technology, that we can really start to drive a more holistic approach towards management, be more efficient. Or I would even go that far. Maybe we even can make it only possible through AI. If technology is running this data, like checking your data in the background and try to detect these correlations between different departments. So that's also something that we have now detected, for example, for large enterprises, that there is quite a significant effect, obviously, between your people results and your financial results, detecting the root causes, but then also suggest recommendable actions, actionable recommendations. I think the second part, which is quite helpful, is that you can really combine that in a single source of truth across different business units, and thus having really a holistic overview. And then I think also the departments start to become somehow comparable. Because if we try to understand how efficiently our marketing team acts versus how efficiently our tech team acts, I think there's quite a big difference, right? So the marketing team, you would rather look into the return on investment, but in the tech, you try to detect the velocity. And if you would even want to say like which department is run more efficiently, impossible. And I think this is now the great way that you can leverage AI to actually detect those patterns and give you like recommendations, but also provide you with real life insights, real time insights across different departments. And then last but not least, I think what we often tend to misunderstand is we take a decision in a company and we hope it's going to be for the better. In our case, we actually changed our strategy towards profitability, tried to actually open an M&A track instead of raising our Series C. But then also, in the end, in our case, I think lots of other stuff happened that actually brought us to file for bankruptcy at some point. But I guess there's more positive results of the decisions that you take and how you actually manage forward. So in our like in corporations, if you change your strategy, for example, let's take again the pharma example, you see your competition is ahead in your R&D phase for your product. If that happens, you basically have two options. Either you take on a lot of money and you try to get ahead of competition, or you stop it completely because from a portfolio value perspective, it doesn't make sense to stay in this position. Let's say you, in the end, took the money, you actually get ahead of competition, and then what? Was it helpful? And this is, in the end, then really, really hard to track. All the decisions that you did, or if you try to optimize your site performance in your manufacturing, the decisions that you take, it's really hard to track them later on. And I think also that that's what we can now do through AI, is that we can really start to track our decisions, the big strategic ones that we're taking, and really follow up and like, what was actually the impact? So what was the impact for basically trusting AI and like recommendations to actually really become a better decision maker? Because let's face it, some of them will bring you the value, some will bring you more value, but some of them also maybe will not bring you the respective value. And this is how AI can also learn to basically give you better recommendations, but at the same time, you and yourself, you finally have an overview what the value means for you. You can monitor the decisions, and thus also you can really see and also how are the big strategic decision makers in your team, who is driving really value, and suddenly also performance management becomes finally objective and not necessarily always subjective as it is in most companies still today. Yeah, and last but not least, I think also AI needs to learn, right? And also it helps the AI as well to actually to learn about the decisions and actually which value was driven later on. So as I told you, I've recently, 6 months ago, joined Ailey Labs in Munich to actually drive their strategic product decisions. So we're the decision intelligence app. And what I basically told you is with what we're trying to do in a very simple manner, you can think it that way, right? Often you have management consultants coming in your company, analyzing your data, interpret it, and try to give you some insights. And that's what management consultants do. This is now what our tool does through AI. We're basically also taking a lot of data. Yes, we do also predictions and forecasts and all of that, but this is, I think, a bit last summer. I think what we are really focusing on is also detecting those insights, the information that you do not get purely by looking at a chart. So really kind of this disrupting the way how we think currently about consulting and about better decision making. But it doesn't stop there, because we also fundamentally believe that this is a very static way, going through data, and then maybe in this point in time, it gives you some insights and some recommendations. You normally have this kind of three bullet points that you will get as the last slide of a McKinsey presentation. But the problem is it's very static, because the world is changing every quarter. And if they were in your company for 3 months, maybe in 3 months later, I don't know what craziness will happen in the next 3 months. And this is basically a way how this information can come to you at your fingertips in real time every morning, and also adapts to the world and how it's changing. So what we're basically doing, or what we did as a first step, was always that we were optimizing for CEO priorities, especially for large corporates and enterprises across the globe, because this is where the highest value has been achieved, right? If a CEO changes their strategies in a certain department, that's how you actually really drive the value. So this was kind of the first use case that we were covering, and how we entered like large Fortune 500 companies globally. And what we're now doing, and we actually did that by providing optimization potential across finance, across procurement, across manufacturing and supply quality, but also go-to-market strategies. And now as a second step, we also understand we want to drive further engagement within the company, because decision-making, yes, happens at the top, and this is where you have the highest value. And that was for us always a good door opener as well. But now actually we're focusing also more in like driving further engagement, especially in the, let's say, mid to top layers, because this is in the end where the daily work is happening, where the daily decisions are being made. And this is now basically how we're now trickling down further towards all levels in the company. So sorry, I think there's a lot of text on the slide. I just copied it out of our sales presentation. So basically, the way how we approached it as well, right? It's basically in 3 waves, and I think we also should be realistic what we can provide and which stage of a company. Because if a company is very far away from innovation, usually they sit on a lot of data. We don't care if it's like structured or unstructured data. But in the end, what's for us as a good door opener is always to basically go in and say, hey, this is the Ailey app. We give you data at your fingertips. We run predictions and give you some insights. That's basically the first step, how we go in. But then actually the real beauty of our solution has been really unlocked through our correlator. So correlator means basically that we correlate data across different departments and start making sense of it. And I think this is how we're going to disrupt the consulting industry, but also help CEOs and like leaders and large corporations to really take better decisions, learn from that, and even become better decision makers. And then last but not least, we've launched 5 agents this year already in the R&D sector, in the financial and the commercial sectors. Now actually working on something for manufacturing and supply to really also leverage agentive AI, but as a real world use case instead of just playing around with it. The great thing is that as we're working with large corporations, we receive huge amounts of data, which help us then to actually train our own models and actually to drive better decisions and also keep a very high accuracy rate on AI. Yes, that's it. Thank you so much.
So we still have some time left. So if anyone has any questions, we can do a quick about 10-minute, 9-minute Q&A. So is there any questions from the audience at the moment? Yes, 1 second. I'll hand you the microphone so everyone can hear you.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for the great presentation. I was wondering how you combine like long-term strategic planning with those like quick decisions you have to make all the time, especially in this like fast-paced world where everything is changing all the time. How you, for example, for external communication, you have to communicate like a long-term roadmap, a long-term strategic plan, but internally things change all the time. So how do you combine that well?
It's actually a very good question. And I think it has different elements to it. So I think the first thing is what you should always communicate externally is what's your vision, right? And for me, vision is what is concretely, how is the future next year and 5 years better? And like, where do you want to go? And your vision in general of your company, for example, should not change at all, right? Even in our case, we wanted to democratize access to financial products, and this didn't change if we were in a high growth pace or if we now optimize for profitability, for example, because that was still our goal. The way how we get there changed by having different products and going different steps. So I think this is how you can communicate still externally, like focus really on the vision, but also be very transparent on that you change the way how you get there. And this is what I would probably do. But still, for example, even in our tool, what we're trying to do is if you suggest your optimization potential in a certain project, we always have also another part which is called related decisions, which already thinks ahead. What are maybe bigger things that will come up in the next 3 to 12 months? So you can take them into your consideration, because then in the end, you're still a human being deciding, right? It's not AI deciding for you. It helps you to facilitate your decision making. But in the end, what it also can do is like remind you, you know what, have you thought about these kind of things coming up? Maybe just following the suggestion as of today might not make sense if you consider the bigger topics coming up. So yeah, I think always coming from the larger vision, transparent on the strategic steps there, but then always keep in mind what's around. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions right now? Yes.
Thank you also from my side for the insightful presentation. I think one of the things you spoke about, which I found super interesting, is your leadership style and being really empathetic with people. And I was wondering, you know, when times get tough, how do you balance, on the one hand, kind of being positive, being happy, being kind of inspirational, but at the same time, kind of being honest and transparent about the situation? How do you kind of think about that, and how might you approach that then with your team?
So yeah, as I said before, right, I'm personally not a big fan of like solving things in a black box alone in the room, because I have a certain perspective and have a certain experience, but I it's one side, and that's why I said like I embrace diverse perspectives on leadership. And I think there's points where you just need to be like brutally honest, because otherwise you're not solving the problem. And that in our case, when I knew we need to switch to profitability, I don't have to invite anyone in and say, oh, should we do it? Because I know I need to save my company, and that's the only way how we're moving forward. So they're top-down decisions where I say, we're gonna do it, yes, no. But then the rest is for really like being vulnerable, be also honest and say, guys, we're in this situation. I know it sucks. And I heard it a lot, honestly, from two of my head-offs back then. They came to me and said, yes, I came here for scaling a company, and I'm not coming here for like optimizing it. And I said, yes, I mean, we all came for that, right? But we have to embrace the fact that the world is changing. It's not me changing it. It's like the world is changing, and what we can do as leaders is just embrace the fact. But also, I think what's also very important is to sit together and say, yes, it sucks. And I think this is also something that I think a lot as we leaders, we try to keep up the good positive energy, but sometimes we really miss out on the situation to really appreciate that it sucks and it's going to be super exhausting. And for me, I think that really helped to not beautify it in the second, but say give room. Even when we had our mass layoffs, the next day we gave everyone a day off because we said, you know, it sucks, breathe through it, and then let's come back 2 days later and really then get on like putting our sleeves up and really work on our new plan. But it's, I think if you do not appreciate that it's hard in this moment, and if you're not honest, how can people support you?
All right, perfect, great. We have time for one final question if anyone has one. Back there.
You talked about all the buzzwords that are existing, and we have a lot of different management systems, OKR, and what you can find like different levels in organizations. How do you see the world like with that kind of AI-based agents moving in, like, you know, is every company having one system? Do you see it like it is now, that you have different parts of the company using different ideas? So what do you think? It's like an integrated system vertically, or how will it happen?
Also good question. I believe the approach for strategic planning can be different, right? So some companies are run on OKRs, some are purely run on sales number, go and get it. But in the end, like your OKR also, I mean, OKR is just another tool for make your strategy more tangible, I would say. And in the end, I think it's probably the tooling helps you more to really focus on the hard goals. And the goals must be to a certain degree somehow numeric. And also OKRs pay into that, right? Even in an OKR, you normally have an objective, you have the key results, again, that you wanna achieve. So I think it's abstracting the layer of what's the format I'm planning, because in the end, most companies are planning for kind of sales growth, value growth, profits. And I think these are, in the end, the key numbers where all company is boiled down as a hard fact, right? And then you can have strategic goals, which are a bit sometimes more softer. But this is, I think, which is the common denominator in those tools and how you can crack it, that you really focus down on like what is, in the end, the number you're optimizing for. And usually in every company, there's, in the end, one number. And if it's shareholder value, but shareholder value is a bit harder to crack.